The two main parts of a film producer's job is, first of all, selecting a project and then figuring out how to get it made, how to greenlight it. In terms of picking a script, you have to pick something that you really, really fall in love with, because the process of making a film is so hard. You will struggle so much with that story, with that script, and you'll get so many rejections that if you are not madly in love with it, it's very, very hard to endure. You might get 500 rejections on one project. You'll get actors saying that they don't want to be in it, directors saying they don't want to direct it, financiers saying they don't want to finance it, crew telling you they don't want to work on it. So you need the love for that story to be just so powerful to basically overcome all those years of rejection that you're very likely to endure on it. So picking a script, what we usually do is we say, are we madly in love with it? Is this something that I want to live with and live and breathe every single day for the years to come? You think about the themes that are in it, and do you love those themes? Do you think these themes are a part of what you're about, what your company's about? We tend to pick stories that have great female roles. That's a really important thing for us. So with looking at the female roles, we think, does the woman drive the story forward? Is this a role? Very often we get scripts where we find that the woman ends up being the best friend or the confidant, and it's the person who says, oh no, I don't think you should do that, that's not very safe, or the person who says, you can do that, I believe in you, good luck. We try and look for the reverse. We look at the story where the woman's driving the action, where the central role, the person who's actually making things happen, is the woman. So that's a very important part of picking projects for us, is how are women portrayed and are women driving the action. Stories we tend to like, we love true stories, things that are typically kind of stories that are based on an ordinary person doing an extraordinary thing, someone that you really don't expect to behave in a heroic way. And then another type of movie that we love movies that have positive messages but don't feel like they're a history lesson. So we like movies that are disguised as a comedy or disguised as a thriller, and when audiences leave they think, oh, that's really interesting, that showed me something interesting. And I think The Kids All Right was very successful in that way, because people came and laughed at the movie and thought that it was a heartwarming comedy, but then they left with all sorts of interesting things that they'd learned about same-sex marriage and about the challenges and the difficulties of a same-sex couple. So those are kind of generally the things we look for in a project. We at Maven Pictures are developing some studio films and independent films. The majority of our movies are independent, but we do have some studio films that we're also developing. We have one studio film that we made last year. The studio films these days need to be 4-quadrant films, which is basically, 4 quadrants means that it has to be for men, women, 25 up, 25 below. They need to be for everyone. The studio business has to have a really, really wide reach. In an independent film, you can make something that is much more targeted and much more niche, and as a result, you can do something that is darker, that is more complex, that is, just a tougher subject. And one of the beauties of the independent film world is there's no story you're not able to tell. You might have to tell it for a tiny budget, and you might have to, make the film for $10,000 in black and white. But there's no story that you're not able to tell, because you're not needing to reach the world. So we're able to choose scripts that have complex central characters, that have maybe an unlikable lead, someone doing unlikable things, that deal with really tough topics, that deal with diseases, that deal with people aging, that deal with death, that deal with depressing, tough topics, which a studio film, it would be much, much harder for the studio film to be made that way. Another beauty of the independent film world is you can really empower your filmmaker to tell the movie and tell the story the way that they'd like to tell it. So we're able, on our independent films, to give filmmakers final cut. We're able to have filmmakers tell the story they want to tell in the way that they want to tell, and that's something that the studio world, it's much, they're making movies for higher budgets, it's much, much harder for them to do it that way. And then finally, we're able to really, pick actors who are extraordinary actors as our leads, who might not necessarily be the biggest names in the world, and that's again something that I think a studio, it's very challenging for them to do, because so much more is riding on the studio film. So one of the films we are right now in post-production on, I'm very, very excited about, is called American Honey, and it's directed by Andrea Arnold. Andrea Arnold is a genius filmmaker who did the movies Fish Tank, and Red Road, and she's won Cannes with 2 of her movies. She's such an amazing artist. And she was able to make American Honey in the way that she wanted to make it from a production standpoint. She discovered a first-time actress for the lead role who is an extraordinary talent. And we were really able to work with her and empower her to make the movie in the way that she wanted to make. And you know, that's something that I think it's one of the beauties of independent films, is you're allowing artists to make the films the way they want to make them. So once we have a script that we've selected that we all love, the next step is to package the project. So what you do in terms of packaging is first you find the director, the right director for the film. So you meet with lots of directors, you pick the person that really feels that they have the right vision for it and creatively the best fit for the script. And then you put the cast together, and that's a really important process because cast have value, and they have value domestically and they have value in the foreign market. So depending on the cast that you pull together, you figure out what budget you can make that movie for. Once you have the cast together, then you start the process of financing, of pulling the financing together. So once you have a script, a director, and the cast, that has a very set value, foreign and domestic. You figure out what that value is, and then you set the budget at that number or a little below that number to make the project make sense financially. And then once you have all those elements together, at that point the movie is greenlit. At Maven Pictures we have a partner that is a financier that has done our last few movies and will do our next few movies. And we're always also open to partnering with other financiers and other production companies. Film is such a collaborative process. You end up working with hundreds of people in the process of making film. And one of the things that a film producer has to really figure out how to do is how to balance all the different needs in terms of what different people are aiming for. In terms of balancing the creative and the financial, as a producer, you're constantly pulled in both directions, because from a creative standpoint, the more resources you have, the better film you can make. So your director and the creative people you're working with are always fighting for more days, more time, more gadgets, more equipment, which makes a better film in most cases creatively. But then the more you spend, the less likely you are to have your investors break even. So you're constantly having to pulled in both directions and having to find the perfect balance where you're making the best possible movie you can creatively, but while protecting your investors and making sure that the budget doesn't escalate to a level where they're not likely to break even. Empowering women in film is something that we think about and talk about every single day in our company. My business partner, Trudy Styler, and I set up Maven with a remit to empower women behind and in front of the camera. And the statistics for women in film are really dire and really heartbreaking. Only 10% of movies made in America have balanced characters in front of the camera in terms of having the same number and the same types of roles for women in front of the camera. And then the stats for women directing, only 9% of movies made last year were directed by women. So something that we look at on every single movie we make is how can we create great female roles? How can we make sure that these roles are as complex, as interesting as a male role would be, and then how can we make sure that we have as many women as possible working behind the camera. We have one film that just came out, Miss You Already, and 3 movies in post right now, American Honey, Freak Show, and Wildling. And out of those 4 films, 3 of the 4 were directed by women, and all 4 of them have amazing female roles at their center. So we're very, very proud of that fact, and something that we work really, really hard to make sure that movies really portray society the way society is. And 51% of the world's population is female, and that should be reflected in the films. So it's something that's really important to us, and we want our movies to be positive representation of women, in terms of women having interesting careers, doing interesting things, and really driving the action of the movies that we tell. Your female characters in your movies, actually your characters in general, they become almost like children to you. It's characters that you live with in the developing of the script and the shooting of the film, and then in the editing, and then in the life of the movie. and you almost think about them as your children and as real existing characters, and you often think, what would this person do? And they inspire you. They, when you're in tricky situations in life, you think, what would that character do? There's one character in particular, we did a movie with Rachel Weisz called The Whistleblower, which was based on a true character, and it's a woman who took on the United Nations for their cover-up of sex trafficking crimes. And she ended up having the whole world against her, and somehow, basically struggled through it and ended up taking the United Nations to court and winning for their cover-up of sex trafficking crimes. There was a character, both in real life and in the film, that I really admired. And in tricky moments in business, I think, what would this character do? It's a character with so much resilience and strength, and she wouldn't give up, and she wouldn't be down. So it's interesting, these characters take on a life of their own, and it's characters that you live with and that inspire you and teach you things. And it's really wonderful to have that impact from, a character that you help bring to life, and then they teach you along the way, and you grow from your interaction with them. My first job out of college was working for McKinsey, which is a consulting firm, and I was doing strategy for their big clients, and then I spent 3 years at HBO doing business development and strategy. So basically I spent my first 6 years doing strategy and business development. And I think the main things that I learned during that time is problem solving. At McKinsey, it's all about solving problems, big and small, and it's something that the McKinsey process really teaches you to do. And then one of the things I learned at HBO made such extraordinary content at the time that I was there. Sopranos was on air, Sex and the City, Oz, The Wire, and it was really exciting to be in a place that made such great content. And then in both those jobs, another thing that I learned that I think is a really important skill of a film producer is working with very different types of people. In the process of making a film, you're working with actors, you're working with writer-directors, you're working with the crew, you're working with financiers, you're working with, ultimately, with the people that are going to distribute your movie, and it's such different types of people, and you really need to learn to work with all these different groups, and when they have different objectives, figure out how to find common ground and how to find a path that is satisfying to every single person. So those are some of the things that I really learned before I started producing films. Before starting Maven, I'd been producing films for 8 years. I produced about 25 films before Maven, and some of those films are really, tiny budget films. And making one film after the other, one of the wonderful things is on every movie you learn, on every movie you have different challenges, and you continue to grow, and you continue to, figure out how to resolve the different challenges, and you slowly get better as a film producer. And I think really the best way to become a film producer is to go through the experience, produce a film, make mistakes, learn, and hopefully don't make the same mistake twice. There's an issue that worries us even more than equal pay, and that's equal opportunity. The stats for women behind the camera in the creative roles are really dire. Only 9% of the movies directed last year were directed by women. Only 15% of the writers were women. Only 25% of the producers were women. 20% of the editors were women, and only 2% of the cinematographers were women. So the issue that worries us as much, if not more, than equal pay is equal opportunity. Making sure that all those important roles in film, that the stats are much more balanced for women. In terms of equal pay, I think that's a really interesting question as well. And one of the things that we notice in film is that women tend to not be as good as men at looking out for themselves. And I think there's something, perhaps this is generalizations, but women tend to be very nurturing and very giving, and they work in film and put together projects or put together businesses, and they don't think, what can I get out of it? They really worry, are the different people working on the film, are they taken care of, and they look out for themselves last. So one of the advice that I give myself all the time, and that I also give young women in all businesses, is, it's wonderful to be generous and to be altruistic and to look out for other people, but every step of the way you also have to think about making sure that you're protected, that you get enough out of it, and just looking out for yourself a little bit. I would say the main creative conflicts that you have on films are in casting, and Depending on who you cast, you get different budgets. So if you cast a very big star, your budget will be bigger, and a mid-level star, you'll have a mid-level budget. And if you want to go for an unknown who might be really creatively right but doesn't have the track record in terms of box office, your budget will be smaller. So those are a lot of the discussions that you have along the way with the director of your film. We tend to try and not make it a conflict, but just make it be very transparent about what casting will mean. And a bigger name might not be the first creative choice for a director, but that will mean more that the director will get more resources to make their film. So we tend to be very transparent and say, we'll support whatever you want to do casting-wise, but there'll be consequences of your choice. And if you want to go for that actor who's an amazing actor but a complete unknown, you're going to be making this as a micro-budget as opposed to making it with a big star in a bigger way. One of the lessons that I've learned is that, I think everyone has deal breakers where they just, someone that they are not willing to cast in a movie or something they're not willing to do, and you have to try and figure out with directors what those are and really not push too hard and just allow them to make their choices, but knowing what the consequences of their choices are. I was given advice by someone who's very important in my life, a guy called Mark Gill. I went to see him when I was 27. I said my dream was to be a film producer. And he said, if you want to be a film producer, be a film producer. Go and do it and go through the process and find a great book, find a great script, find something that you're passionate about and go and figure out, partner with someone who has more experience than you and figure out how to get it made. And it was such good advice, and that's definitely advice that I give to people who want to work in film, whether you want to be a writer, a director, an actor, a producer. Find something you're passionate about and then fight tooth and nail to get it made. And one of the great things about film today is you can make films for such low budgets. You can go and make a short film for $3,000. You can go and make a feature film for $10,000 and make films. If you want to learn how to do it, go and make a film and make mistakes, learn from your mistakes and do it again and become better at it. So it was advice that I'm very, very grateful that I was given, and it's advice that I pass on to anyone wanting to work in film. One of the pieces of advice that I wish I'd been given when I was 21 is pick really good partners. I think making films is too hard an endeavor to do alone. Some people manage to do it alone. I really admire them, but it's such a hard job. So find a great partner to make films with, whether it's a one-off partner on a specific project or a partner on all your movies, and find someone that is very, very good at something that you may not be good at, or may not have the experience or may not naturally have the talent. And so find someone that's experienced that will make up for your weaknesses. And don't be afraid to partner with someone that is a bigger fish than you are, that someone that is more experienced than you are. And I think you learn so much from these partnerships, whether it's a one-off project or whether it's in a company. So I would say that's important advice that I wish I'd been given when I started. Another piece of advice is, which I also wish I'd been given, but I've learned along the way, is enjoy the small victories. And I think, as an entrepreneur, you get knocks all day long, and then occasionally, once a week, once a month, once a year, something great happens. And whether that great thing is you got your movie into Sundance, or you sold your movie to a distributor you really wanted to sell it to, or an exciting actor or director wants to be involved in one of your projects, savor those small victories and celebrate them, because they need to make up for the 100 knocks that you're going to get next week. And so you have to enjoy, every positive moment as an entrepreneur, and really learn to enjoy the process and not just think about the end product, but enjoy every positive step that happens along the way of making a movie.